Okay, I'm going to mix another book here as appropriate in various chapters. It's called Peopling of the Earth, An Introduction to World Prehistory by Brian Fagan and Nadia Durrani. Prehistory is basically starting maybe 3.3 million years ago or so, when humans began to use stone tools, to the time, let's say about 5,000 years ago, when humans started to write things in various forms. So written documentation happens about after 5,000 years to the present, and before that it's in other forms. So just it has some interesting additional information, especially in terms of the graphics used in this book versus the main book we are using. So this is kind of the content table of contents in a brief form in this book. Introduction to World Prehistory, the beginning 7 million to 30,000 years ago, which includes human origins and archaic humans. The Great Diaspora, the origins and spread of modern humans, which we will look at later in the third or fourth chapter. So that goes from 350,000 years ago to modern times. And the first farmers, 10,000 to 10,000 BC to modern times, so basically through the Holocene. And the Old World civilizations, 3000 BC to modern times, and the special section on Native American civilizations in the New World before 2000 BC to AD 1534. Okay, so we have already seen some dating methods, and we'll see some more in the main book. So here we are looking at dates, modern times, so after 81 going to 4500 BC, 70,000 before present, 500,000 before present, and 5 million years before present. As you probably know, the isotopes on which we depend on for dating have to have a half-life that covers a long enough period. So if you want to go to 5 million years, then obviously you need to have a half-life of millions of years. So uranium series dating happens here. So the method involved are things like potassium argon dating, which are in volcanic materials, dendrochronology, which is tree rings, radiocarbon dating, which is C14, so that's in organic materials, and historical documents, so imported objects, most useful, so that comes to much closer times here. And among them, the major events starting backwards, Australopithecus, the Homo lineages, Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, Homo sapiens, starting at this period, which we will look at in much more detail. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, which went extinct, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. First Americans, origins of agriculture, origins of cities, European settlements of the New World, so North America, Central and South America, Roman Empire, and so on. These conventions are used in the tables throughout this book, where continuous line means chronology is firmly established, like let's say this one. Line terminating in an arrow means time span continues beyond the arrow, so we can go to the origin of the solar system here and to the present in this direction. So not as certain, but here we go to the modern. If it terminates with a bar in the tables that we'll look at in other chapters, means the limit of chronology is firmly established. Broken line means chronology is doubtful, and question mark besides the name of a site means its date is not firmly established. So this just defines various organizations, so general categories of ancient human societies. So total numbers can be less than 100 up to a few thousand, 5,000 to 20,000 plus. Generally broad categories, and generally 20,000 plus. So these are called bands, tribes, and chiefdoms, and here they become state organized societies. And social organization can be egalitarian, informal leadership in a band, segmentary society, pan-tribal associations, raids by small groups. So these associations can be dynamic depending on the situation. Alliances are made and broken, whereas in a chiefdom, kinship-based ranking under hereditary leader, high-ranking warriors, and in the state-organized societies, you have class-based hierarchy under king or emperor armies. Okay, so similarly, there are economic organizations, can be mobile hunter-gatherers, settled farmers, pastoralists, herders, central accumulation, redistribution, some craft specialization, centralized bureaucracy, tribute-based taxation laws, and so on. And settlements, bands tend to be in temporary camps, whereas tribes tend to be permanent villages. Chiefdom, they have typically fortified centers because they're based on military strength, and they have ritual centers, whereas state-organized societies tend to be urban, so cities, towns, frontier defenses, and infrastructure like roads. I won't go into details. So religious organizations, architecture, you can see the differences here, and you also can relate to what have been found in archaeological sites. So pyramids of Giza, for example, and the Castillo Chichen Itza of Mexico. Archaeological examples, all Paleolithic societies including Paleo-Indians, all early farmers, many early metalworking and formative societies, Mississippi and USA, smaller African kingdoms, and here in state-organized societies you have all ancient civilizations that we will look at, like Mesoamerica, Peru, Near East, Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, India and China, Greece and Rome. In modern examples, we have bands like Eskimos and Kungsan, Australian Aborigines. We have Pueblos, Southwest USA, New Guinea Highlanders, Nuer and Dinka in East Africa. Under chiefdoms, we have Northwest Coast Indians in USA, 18th century Polynesian chiefdoms in Tonga, Tahiti, Hawaii, and of course all modern states belong in the state-organized societies. So the summary of this introductory chapter is that archaeology is the study of the cultural evolution of humankind using the material remains of past human behavior. These material remains make up the archaeological record, the archives of the human past. Whereas historians study written records, archaeologists deal with an often anonymous past. Archaeology is unique among the sciences in its ability to study culture change over long periods of time, so evolutionary time scales. Text-aided archaeology combines the evidence of archaeology with documentary sources, whereas prehistoric archaeology is a study of prehistory, the period of human past before written records. The study of world prehistory, which developed in the 1950s, is a study of prehistory from a global perspective using archaeology and other sources. All human societies are interested in the past, of course, but they think of it in different terms and use it for different purposes. And there can become political tools as well. Archaeologists, Westerners generally conceive of time in a linear way, whereas many non-Western groups measure time by the cycles of seasons and the movement of heavenly bodies. So some astronomy knowledge was built into these ideas. They use linear time when it is of use for them. So historical lineages are measured, for example, in linear times. Archaeology is not the only way of approaching history, for many societies have oral histories, alternative perspectives on the past that are of vital importance in preserving traditional cultures and values. Theoretical approaches to human prehistory abound, but they can be divided in general terms into processual and post-processual approaches. The processual as culture as an adaptation approach uses multilinear cultural evolution and cultural ecology to provide a viable general framework for studying world prehistory based on the assumption that human societies evolved in many diverse ways. Archaeologists conventionally make a distinction between pre-state and state-organized societies as a part of this culture as adaptation approach or processual approach. Evolutionary ecology makes use of the mechanisms of natural selection and optimal foraging strategy to interpret hunter-gatherer societies in terms of energy costs and risk management. So you can imagine that the organization of the thoughts and evidences become very different. In recent years, archaeologists have distinguished between external constraints on cultural change, such as environmental factors, and internal constraints created by the actions of individuals or groups. So we'll go through many of these examples where we deal with the idea of environmental determinism, where some part of the community assumes that climate as a perturbation is a deterministic factor in these things, whereas this idea that climate is one factor, environmental factors are one group of drivers, but there are internal constraints also created by the actions of individuals and groups, where culture, evolution of culture, memes, exchanges, trading, etc. become a big part of the interpretation as well. A new generation of research is focusing on ideologies, human interactions, gender relations, and other topics, combining processual and post-processual approaches to study both types of constraints and their influences on the past. So with this introduction, I'll stop here and introduce another podcast here on a bit more of the derived timelines from archaeological evidences and the linkages between how our ancestors and the Homo lineages evolved over time and the climate changes that occurred along the way. Okay?